It began with silence, the kind of silence that feels unnatural, as though the world itself is holding its breath. The valley lay under a shroud of night, stars muted by heavy clouds, the moon a pale smear of light above the ridges. By day this place was alive with the chatter of merchants, children running barefoot between the mud brick houses, and the constant smoke rising from clay ovens. But on this night, everything was still. The air carried a strange weight, and though the people of the village were gathered in their homes, no one could explain why the dogs wouldn't bark, why the crickets had fallen silent, why the usual heartbeat of the village had stopped. Inside the largest house near the square, a family was celebrating. The eldest daughter had been betrothed, and neighbors filled the home with gifts of dried fruit, jars of honey, and hand-woven cloth. Lanterns glowed on the wooden beams, and music drifted from a fiddle. For a brief moment, life felt safe and ordinary. But as the laughter echoed, no one noticed the way shadows moved along the outer walls, or the figure that stood still at the edge of the square, watching, listening, waiting. The first killing was almost unnoticed. An old man stepping outside to relieve himself never returned. His body slumped behind the water trough, throat opened so neatly it seemed as if he'd simply lain down to sleep. Minutes later, a young boy sent to fetch firewood stumbled across the body, but before his scream could split the air, a hand pressed against his mouth, and he too vanished into the dark. Inside, the fiddler's tune broke off suddenly. People turned confused. The fiddler stood with wide eyes, his chest blooming red where the bow had once glided. He fell and the music ended. The room erupted in panic. Women shrieked. Men grabbed whatever they could for weapons, knives from tables, fire pokers from the hearth. But the killer had already melted back into the dark, unseen. What followed was chaos, a pattern repeated across the village. In one home, a mother carried her infant to bed, only to find her husband sprawled across the floorboards, lifeless, eyes frozen in terror. In another, a family sat down to eat, when smoke poured through their windows, the door barred from the outside. They beat against the wood until their fists bled, until screams became coughs, and then silence. The killings spread like fire. No corner of the village was spared. Some victims never even woke, smothered in their sleep with cloth soaked in something bitter that burned their lungs. Others found themselves dragged into the square, where shadows moved in the torchlight, carrying out executions with a kind of cold precision. It wasn't a frenzy, it was a design. Each life taken seemed part of a grim tally. By midnight, dozens were dead. By 1 o'clock, hundreds. The villagers tried to fight, tried to escape, but no one reached the edge of the valley alive. Every path was blocked, every attempt at flight answered with blood. Doors that were thrown open revealed corpses already stacked in the streets. Children hid under beds, only to be dragged out by ankles. Young men armed themselves and charged into the square. But the square was empty when they arrived, until blades flashed from rooftops, cutting them down one by one. The horror was not only in the killing, but in the silence that returned afterward. A house full of screams would fall quiet, leaving only the crackle of fire and the drip of blood from broken beams. And then the next house would erupt, and fall silent again. Step by step, building by building, the shadow moved. Sometime after 2, a young woman named Alara found herself crawling through an alley. Blood streaked across her face, though it wasn't her own. She had watched her family fall. Her father stabbed at the door, her mother dragged across the floor. She'd hidden in the storeroom, breath locked in her throat, until she couldn't bear the silence any longer. Now she stumbled over bodies, whispering prayers with every breath. She thought she heard footsteps behind her, But when she turned, there was only darkness. She wasn't the only one alive yet. Somewhere else, in the northern quarter, a boy crouched in a closet, clutching a broken doll. His tears soaked the sleeve of his tunic, his small body shaking violently. He'd watched through a crack as his brothers were struck down. And yet, somehow the killer hadn't opened the closet door. The boy told himself not to breathe, not to move, because if he made a sound, the shadow would hear him. In the square, flames licked at the night sky. Bodies lay heaped like discarded dolls. The stench of iron and smoke mixed in the air. And yet, through it all there was a kind of order. On one wall, a message was scrawled in blood. It was crude, hurried, but legible. 999. Nothing else. No name. No warning. Just a number. By the time dawn touched the ridges of the valley, the village was gone. The laughter that had filled it hours before was erased, replaced with silence so heavy it seemed eternal. Of the 1,000 who had lived there, only one was left breathing. His small cries echoed faintly from a closet, muffled by the clothes that hid him. The figure in the shadows paused outside, listening. For a moment, it seemed the door would be pulled open, and the last life would join the others. But then footsteps moved away. The boy was left alive, not by accident, but by design. The massacre was complete. 999 lives taken. One spared. But why? The valley would keep its secret for years. The blood-soaked soil swallowing the truth. Yet for those who stumbled upon it, travelers who dared to enter the ruins, the question always lingered. What kind of being could extinguish so many lives in a single night? Why spare one child? And was the shadow still waiting in the valley, counting down, waiting for the number to be finished? The boy's cries eventually faded, leaving nothing but silence once more. A silence too heavy, too unnatural, as though the valley itself was holding its breath. The valley lay untouched for days, hidden from the outside world by its rugged cliffs and thick forests. The smoke that had once spiraled into the night sky dispersed quickly, carried away by the wind, as though nature itself wanted to erase the evidence. No one passed through. No merchant's cart creaked along the dirt road, and no traveler dared to enter the path that wound into the hollow. The world carried on, unaware that in a single night, 999 lives had been stolen, and a single breath remained. It wasn't until nearly a week later that a group of traders approached from the east. They had heard nothing unusual, for the village was small, far from the main road, but it was a regular stop on their journey. They expected greetings at the gate, the eager children running out to see the wares, the smell of bread baking from the hearths. Instead, they found silence. At first, they thought the place deserted. The gate stood ajar, and no guards watched the path. The streets were empty, lined with clay houses whose doors hung open. The traders called out, their voices echoing unnaturally against the stone walls. But no one replied. A cart creaked as it was pulled further in, wheels crunching against something brittle. When the driver looked down, his breath caught in his throat. Bones, small and blackened, scattered across the dirt. The alarm spread quickly. Men and women dismounted, torches in hand, and moved into the square. What they found turned their stomachs. Bodies lay stacked in heaps, stiff and pale, eyes frozen open. Some had been burned, some hacked apart, others still whole but lifeless. The ground was black with dried blood. The traders gagged. Some dropped their torches, and one woman fell to her knees, sobbing uncontrollably. On the wall of the largest house, the message remained, 999. It dripped down the stone in dark streaks, dried and flaky. The number seemed to pulse even in daylight, mocking them with its simplicity. None of them spoke at first.
unable to comprehend. When words did come, they were whispered, as though speaking too loudly might wake something. Who could have done this? One man muttered, his face pale. An army. Another guessed, though his voice shook. It must have been soldiers, bandits. No, a woman interrupted. Not like this. An army leaves fire, weapons, armor, signs of battle. This is something else. They searched the houses cautiously, though most of them wished to leave immediately. Inside, the horrors multiplied. Families lay in their beds, throats cut cleanly, as if death had come while they drew. Whole households had been gathered into rooms and suffocated, their mouths and nostrils clogged with ash. In one corner house, a fire had raged, charring every surface, but even in the ash they could still see the outlines of human forms, curled and twisted. In the northern quarter, one of the traders froze. From within a broken door, he thought he heard something, a faint rustle, the sound of movement. He gestured to the others, and they entered together. The air was thick and sour with rot, and they nearly turned back. But then they heard it again, a soft whimper, a muffled cry. In the closet, behind torn fabric and wooden planks, they found him, a boy, barely more than 6. His face streaked with dried tears and grime. His clothes were stiff with blood that wasn't his own. When the door creaked open, he recoiled, pressing into the corner, eyes wide and unblinking. He didn't speak, only trembled as they pulled him into the light. The traders tried to ask his name, where his family was, what had happened, but the child gave no answer. His lips moved soundlessly, as if words had been stolen from him. One of the women cradled him, whispering gently, but he did not respond. His gaze flicked constantly to the shadows, as if he expected them to move. Word of the massacre spread quickly after that. The traders fled the valley, returning to the nearest town, where they brought their tale to the authorities. At first, the officials did not believe them. How could there be 999 dead in one night, with no witnesses, no explanation? But when a search party was sent, the truth could not be denied. The valley had become a graveyard. The boy was taken into custody, cared for by the town's magistrate, but he remained silent. Days passed, and not a single word left his lips. Doctors examined him, priests prayed over him, yet nothing stirred him from his muteness. At night he woke screaming, clawing at the walls, shouting words no one understood. He spoke in fragments, numbers, whispers of voices that no one else heard. 9, 9, 9, he would murmur, over and over, until his throat gave out. The authorities demanded answers. Who could have done this? Bandits, a rival village. Some whispered of plague, but plague does not carve numbers in blood. Theories spread like fire. Some said it was a punishment from God. Others claimed the valley was cursed, haunted by spirits. A few, the ones who had seen the sight themselves, said it was not the work of many, but of one figure moving through the night with the patience of death itself. Investigators returned to the valley, studying the scene with grim fascination. They found no tracks leading out, no signs of horses or carts. The gates of the village had never been broken. Whoever had done this had entered quietly and left without a trace. The tally of the dead confirmed what the message on the wall had said. 999 lives, only one missing, only the boy alive. As the days turned into weeks, the story spread across the region. Fear clung to it, carried from mouth to mouth, growing larger with each telling. Travelers avoided the valley altogether, refusing to even take the roads nearby. Mothers held their children close at night, whispering prayers against the darkness. Men sat in taverns, swearing they would hunt the killer if they ever met him, though none dared to step near the cursed ground. The boy's presence only deepened the mystery. Why had he been spared? What did the figure want from him? Was he chosen or cursed? Priests declared he must be blessed, protected by divine will. Others whispered he was marked, left alive as part of some unholy pact. The magistrate tried to adopt him, raising him as his own, but the boy never settled. He would sit for hours, staring at the walls, scratching numbers into wood with his fingernails, 99, over and over again. When food was placed before him, he ate only enough to survive. He did not laugh, did not play, did not weep. Only at night did he come alive, shrieking in terror, his cries carrying through the house, until neighbors covered their ears. One night, weeks after the massacre, the magistrate woke to find the boy standing at the edge of his bed, silent, eyes wide. In the faint glow of the hearth, the child whispered something the man could barely hear. "He's not finished." The magistrate shivered. "Who, child? Who is not finished?" The boy turned slowly toward the window, staring into the darkness outside. His lips trembled, and for the first time since they had found him, he spoke with clarity. "The shadow." He left one behind, then he collapsed, unconscious, as if the words had cost him everything. The magistrate lay awake until dawn, staring at the ceiling, those words echoing in his mind. If 999 had died, then perhaps the boy was not saved at all. Perhaps he was only waiting for the count to be completed. And if that was true, then the shadow would return.
The magistrate did not sleep again after that night. The boy's words haunted him, repeating endlessly in his mind. The shadow, he left one behind. He tried to convince himself it was nothing more than a child's nightmare, a fragment of trauma, twisted into words. But the more he thought, the less he believed his own excuses. Children might forget details, but they did not invent horrors that perfectly matched the blood-soaked walls of an empty village. He increased the guards around his home, 2 men stationed at the doors, 2 more at the windows, and 1 at the boy's room. But even with steel and torches, he felt no safer. The town itself began to change. Rumors spread like sickness. People whispered that the massacre was a curse, that the child carried it with him, that the shadow followed wherever he went. Markets emptied earlier each day, and by nightfall, the streets were deserted. Doors were bolted, windows shuttered. Still fear seeped through. The boy remained silent most days, tracing 999 into every surface he could reach. Wooden tables, walls, even his own arms were scratched with shallow marks, bleeding sometimes when he dug too deeply. The magistrate tried to stop him, but the child would thrash and scream until allowed to continue. It was as though the number itself was his lifeline, the only thing tethering him to reality. One night, the guard posted outside the boy's room swore he saw movement inside. He claimed a shadow crossed the floor, tall and thin, though the firelight burned steady, and no one else entered. When he opened the door, the boy was awake, sitting upright in bed, staring at the corner. He whispered, "He's waiting." After that, the guard refused to take the post again. The magistrate called for priests from neighboring towns. They performed rites, burned incense, sprinkled holy water, and chanted prayers. For a brief moment, it seemed to bring peace. The boy slept without screaming for the first time in weeks. But the very next day, a shepherd was found dead outside the town walls. His flock wandered untended, and his body lay stiff in the grass, his eyes wide, his mouth open as though he had seen something that froze him in place. There was no wound, no blood, no weapon, only his face twisted in silent terror. The townspeople began to panic. They remembered the boy's words, "He's not finished." Whispers grew louder. The shadow had left the valley, and it was here now. Some demanded the boy be cast out, left to the wilderness, claiming he was the mark that drew death upon them. Others argued he must be protected, that if he died, the shadow would come for all of them. The magistrate stood firm. He would not abandon the child, but each night he lay awake, heart pounding, wondering if his decision would doom them all. More deaths followed. A merchant, found slumped over his stall,
eyes black as ink. A woman who went to draw water from the well and never returned. Her body discovered at dawn, curled like a doll at the bottom, limbs bent unnatural. Of a pair of brothers, strong men, hunters, were found lifeless in the forest, their throats marked with long, clean cuts that no blade from the village could have made. The number spread with the deaths on the walls of the well, carved with sharp stone. On the forest tree where the brothers lay, 100 war in blood smeared across the merchant's stall. 101. The townspeople were struck by the realization the count had begun again. Panic consumed the town. People locked themselves inside their homes, refusing to step out even in daylight. The magistrate gathered men to form search parties, but they found nothing. No footprints, no tools, no sign of an intruder. It was as if the killer drifted like smoke, leaving only corpses and numbers behind. The boy grew restless, his silence broke in fragments, muttering to himself in dark corners. He spoke of voices whispering in his ears, of cold hands brushing his skin when no one else was near. "He is finishing the number," he whispered. "He will not stop until it's done." The magistrate pressed him for answers. "Who is he? Why did he leave you alive?" The boy's eyes filled with tears, though no sound came at first. "Finally," he whispered, "because I am his witness." His hands shook violently. "He wants someone to see." The magistrate's blood turned to ice. To see, that was why one child had been left alive, when 999 others had perished. The massacre was not a crime of anger or vengeance. It was a performance, and the boy was the audience. That night, the magistrate dreamed of the valley. He saw the corpses laid out in rows, the number carved into the stone, the shadow moving among them, with a calm, deliberate grace. In the dream, he turned, and though the figure had no face, he felt its gaze pierce him. A voice echoed, deep and hollow, "Not finished." He woke drenched in sweat, gasping for air, and knew instinctively the deaths would continue. Within a fortnight, the count had risen to 1,010. The numbers appeared faster than the magistrate's men could bury the bodies. Fear suffocated the town. Families fled in the night, abandoning their homes and livelihoods. Roads filled with carts and livestock, yet even those who left were not safe. A family of 5, fleeing west, was found by travelers days later, slaughtered by the roadside, the number painted across the wagon in their blood. The magistrate was losing control. He wrote letters to every neighboring authority, pleading for soldiers, for investigators, for anyone who could help. But most refused. The story of the valley had already spread too far, and now no one wanted to approach what was called the curse of. Only one man answered the call, a wandering scholar, tall and gaunt, with eyes like storm clouds. He introduced himself, simply as Dareth. He carried no sword, only a satchel filled with scrolls and a thin, jagged dagger that seemed more ceremonial than practical. He listened as the magistrate explained, saying nothing, his face unreadable. When the tale was done, Dareth asked only one question: "Where is the boy?" The magistrate brought him to the child. The boy sat on the floor, scratching numbers into the. When Dareth entered, the boy's hand froze. Slowly, he lifted his gaze. For the first time in weeks he smiled, though it was faint, trembling and terrible. "You've seen him too," the boy whispered. Dareth's face tightened, but he gave no reply. That night, the scholar spoke privately with the magistrate. He told him the killings were no curse, no random slaughter. They were ritual. "There is an old belief," Dareth explained, "that death is a ladder. Each soul taken is a. Some seek to climb it, to reach beyond this world, to tear the veil." He leaned closer, his voice low. 999 was never the end. It was the foundation. The true work begins now. The magistrate asked the question he dreaded. How many must die before it ends? Dareth's eyes flickered to the window, to the darkness pressing beyond. His reply was a whisper. As many as it takes. The magistrate shuddered. The boy's words, the numbers, the silence of the valley. It all began to align. Whoever the shadow was, he was not just a killer. He was building something, step by step, body by body, and the boy was meant to witness the final moment, the last number. The killings continued. By the end of the month, the tally had risen past 1,050. Each corpse added precision to the count, carved, painted, smeared. Some victims were strangers, passing through, others townsfolk who had barricaded themselves in their homes. No one was safe. The magistrate grew desperate, watching his town empty, watching the survivors glance over their shoulders at every flicker of shadow. Dareth studied the numbers, tracing patterns, muttering calculations under his breath. The boy, meanwhile, had grown eerily calm. He no longer screamed at night, no longer clawed at the walls. Instead, he sat silently, waiting, as though he already knew what was coming. And in the stillness of one midnight, when the air grew heavy, and even the guards dared not speak, the boy whispered a single sentence that chilled the magistrate to his core. "He's almost here." The night the shadow finally came to the town began with an uneasy stillness. The magistrate felt it before anyone else did, though he couldn't explain why. He stood at his window long after the lamps had burned low, staring at the empty street below, the sound of his own heartbeat louder than the silence outside. It was the kind of silence that pressed against the ears, as though the world itself had been muffled. Even the wind had ceased. Guards were posted at every corner, their torches hissing in the dark. Dareth had ordered them not to wander, not to break formation, but to hold their ground until dawn. The boy lay in the magistrate's guest room, curled beneath blankets, eyes open. He hadn't slept in 2 nights, and when asked why, he only muttered, "He is closer now." The magistrate finally turned from the window and tried to rest, but sleep was impossible. Every creak of the house set his nerves on edge. Every flicker of the fire felt like a signal. At some point in the endless night, a bell rang in the distance, a single clang, sharp and hollow. Then silence. The guards rushed toward the sound, their torches bobbing in the dark. They found the bell tower empty. The rope still swayed as if freshly pulled, but there was no one there. The guard on duty had vanished. On the stone floor beneath the bell, in fresh strokes of crimson, was painted a number 151. The men recoiled, fear clutching their throats. One of them swore he saw a figure moving along the rooftops, but when torches turned toward it, nothing was there. A moment later, another guard cried out. They found him with his throat slit, blood soaking the dirt. His eyes stared upward, still wide with the horror of what he had seen. The square erupted into chaos. Guards shouted, torches whipped frantically, and people bolted their doors tighter. The magistrate rushed into the street, sword trembling in his hand. He could feel it now, the presence, not like a man approaching, not like the noise of boots, or the rattle of armor. It was a weight in the air, a suffocating awareness, that something enormous, invisible and merciless, was watching. "Hold the line." Dareth's voice cut through the panic. The scholar stood in the square, dagger in hand, his face pale but steady. "He is here. Do not scatter." The guards tried to obey, forming a ragged circle of steel and fire, but then the torches flickered, one by one, as if an unseen wind swept across them. Flames guttered and shrank. Shadows deepened, stretching unnaturally across the ground, and in those shadows, something moved. At first it was only a ripple, a darker stain against the dark. Then it rose, tall and thin, pulling itself upright like smoke solidifying into flesh. It had no face, only the impression of features shifting beneath a veil of blood. Its limbs were long, too long, bending unnaturally as it stepped forward. Wherever its feet touched, the ground darkened, as if scorched. The men faltered. One raised his spear, shouting a prayer, but the shadow was already upon him. The spear passed straight through, striking nothing. The guard gasped, eyes bulging, then collapsed as blood poured from his mouth. When they lifted him, there was no wound, only a look of sheer terror frozen into his face. The circle broke. Men fled, dropping torches, scattering into the street. The shadow moved with impossible speed, appearing where they ran, cutting them down without blade or touch. Some simply fell lifeless. Others were ripped apart, as though invisible claws had torn through them. Screams filled the night, echoing off the stone walls, drowning the silence in a tide of panic. The magistrate stumbled backward, sword useless in his hand. He had faced criminals, thieves, even soldiers, but this was no man. He knew it now beyond doubt. This was the same being that had emptied the valley, that had carved the number 999 into stone, and now it had come to finish what it started. Dareth stood his ground. He raised the jagged dagger, its surface etched with symbols the magistrate didn't recognize. "You cannot take him," the scholar shouted, pointing toward the magistrate's house. "You will not finish your count tonight." The shadow paused. It tilted its head, as though considering. Then slowly, its formless face turned toward the magistrate's home, toward the boy. Dareth lunged, the dagger slicing through the air. For a heartbeat, the shadow recoiled, its form rippling like water, struck by a stone. A hiss filled the air, low and inhuman, vibrating through bone. But then it steadied, and with a single sweep of its long arm, it sent Dareth flying across the square. He struck the stone wall with a sickening crack, and crumpled, motionless. The magistrate ran. He did not think, did not look back. He sprinted through the streets, heart hammering, until he burst into his home. The boy was standing at the window staring into the night, his face lit by the dying fire. He turned as the magistrate entered, and for the first time, the magistrate saw no fear in his eyes, only resignation. "He's here," the boy whispered. "He came for me." The magistrate grabbed him, dragging him from the window. "No, child, not while I breathe." He bolted the doors, barred the shutters, and drew his sword again. But even as he moved, he knew it was useless. No bolt, no blade, no prayer could stop what was coming. The torches outside went out, one after another, until only darkness remained. Then, with a sound like fabric tearing, the shadow seeped through the cracks in the door. It did not break wood or smash hinges. It simply entered, as though walls meant nothing. Its presence filled the room, pressing against the magistrate's lungs, choking him with fear. The boy stood very still. His small body trembled, but he did not move. His eyes locked on the figure, and in them was the same terrible recognition he had shown in the valley. He was not seeing the shadow for the first time. He had seen it before, again and again, in his dreams, in the night, in the endless screams of his village. The magistrate raised his sword and charged. He swung with every ounce of strength, the blade slicing through the figure's chest. But the shadow did not falter. Instead, a cold wave struck the magistrate, freezing his limbs, sending him crashing to the floor. He gasped, but his chest would not rise. He tried to scream, but his voice was gone. As his vision blurred, he realized he was not bleeding. He was simply empty, drained of life. The boy cried out then, his voice breaking. "Please." The shadow turned its faceless gaze toward him. For a moment, the boy thought it would strike, that the count would finally be complete. But the shadow did not move. Instead, it reached out a long clawed hand, and brushed it gently across the boy's face. The touch was cold, colder than death, yet strangely tender. Then the shadow withdrew. It turned, passing back through the wall, leaving only silence in its wake. The magistrate's body lay still on the floor, eyes open and glassy. The boy collapsed beside him, sobbing, clutching his small fists against his chest. When dawn came, the town was broken. Half the guards were dead, their bodies twisted in the square. The magistrate was gone, and Dareth's body was nowhere to be found. Only the boy remained, silent once again, his face pale, his eyes haunted. On the magistrate's door, painted in thick strokes of blood, was a new number, and the townspeople understood then. The shadow had not come to end its work. It had come to continue. The massacre had never truly stopped. It would not stop. It would go on, until the final number was reached. The boy whispered it that night, his voice hoarse, almost inaudible. "He's still counting. He won't stop. He will never stop." And in the silence that followed, every soul in the town knew they were only waiting their turn.
The sound of the river was louder that night, almost as though it carried with it the weight of the screams that had once echoed through the valley. Michael sat alone on the edge of the broken bridge, his notebook in his lap, the pages filled with sketches and fragments of words he could hardly understand. The ruins of the village behind him seemed to shift in the darkness, every burned-out wall and collapsed roof reminding him of how fragile life really was. He had seen crime scenes before, horrific murders, but nothing compared to this. 999 lives taken, one spared. The tally haunted him. The boy who survived haunted him. Every time Michael closed his eyes, he saw the child's trembling hands, heard his cracked voice whispering, "It wanted one left." The authorities had tried to keep the site sealed, but word had spread. Journalists, investigators, even wanderers searching for legends had begun to arrive. Some lasted a day, others barely an hour before they fled, claiming they'd heard voices, felt watched, seen shapes in the ruins. Michael stayed because he had to. He needed to know what had happened. It wasn't just about solving a case. It was about answering a question that clawed at him with every breath. Why spare one? By the time the fourth night came, a small group had gathered with him. There was Elena, the journalist with the sharp eyes and sharper questions. Harrow, a former soldier who claimed he'd seen things in war that made this look tame. And Father Cole, a priest, who walked the ruins each evening whispering prayers under his breath. They made an uneasy circle around a fire in the square, the same square where the bodies had been piled. None of them liked being there, but none of them wanted to be alone either. "It's not just a massacre," Elena said, her voice low, her gaze on the flames. "It's a message, that number written in blood. It wasn't random. 999. That's not an accident. Someone wanted it remembered." Michael tapped his pen against the notebook. "Someone wanted it finished," he corrected. 999, not 1000. "That's deliberate. They left the boy because the number isn't complete yet." Harrow shifted uncomfortably, his scarred hands flexing. "You're talking like it's a game. Numbers don't mean anything. People do. This was a slaughter and we should be asking how, not why." "How?" Father Cole's voice was sharp, surprising them all. He usually spoke softly, like every word weighed too much. "We've seen how. Slit throats, burned homes, stacked bodies. The question is why. Evil doesn't spill that much blood without purpose. This wasn't madness. This was ritual." The word hung in the air like a curse. Ritual. Elena crossed herself unconsciously, though she wasn't religious. Harrow muttered something under his breath. Michael just stared into the flames, and in them he saw again the boy's pale face, the way his eyes had seemed older than any child's should be. That night, sleep didn't come easily. They lay on the cracked ground of the square, the fire burning low, each of them half dozing, half listening. Somewhere deep in the ruins, wood creaked. A window shattered. Michael sat up, straining his ears. Then he heard it, a child's laughter, high, thin and hollow, drifting across the valley. He was on his feet before he realized it, notebook in one hand, flashlight in the other. The others stirred, muttering, but when the laughter came again, closer this time, they followed. Together, they moved into the northern quarter of the village, their lights catching on jagged beams and collapsed roofs. The laughter echoed again from nowhere, and everywhere at once. They found the closet. It was half collapsed, the roof pressing down on the walls, but inside the splintered wood, there was space just large enough for a small child to hide. Blood still stained the floor. On the wall, scratched into the plaster by tiny fingernails, were words repeated over and over. "It wanted one. It wanted one. It wanted one. It wanted one." Elena's face went pale. "He wrote this. The boy." Michael crouched,
tracing the grooves with his finger. The scratches were deep, frantic, the work of someone trying to keep themselves sane. He could almost feel the terror in each line. Suddenly Harrow cursed, raising his gun. Movement. He barked. A shadow darted between the ruins. Fast, too fast for a person. Michael's heart hammered in his chest as he spun with his flashlight, the beam catching only emptiness. But the sound of footsteps was real, circling them, closing in. The laughter rose again. They ran back to the square, back to the fire, as though the flames alone could keep the darkness at bay. None of them spoke until the laughter faded, leaving only the ragged sound of their own breathing. "It's still here," Elena whispered. "Whatever did this, it never left." The next day, the group divided. Harrow insisted on checking the perimeter, searching for any sign of a physical intruder. Elena pored over old records she had brought, tracing patterns of massacres that spanned decades, all with numbers that stopped just short of round figures. Father Cole spent hours kneeling in the ruins of the chapel, praying until his lips bled. Michael followed the river. The river had always been important. The villagers had lived by it, drawn their water from it, told stories about it. The boy had mentioned it too, whispering about voices that came from the water at night. Now, as Michael knelt on the bank, he heard it, faint, almost inaudible, but there, a whisper carried on the current. He leaned closer, heart pounding, and the words came clear. "One more." He stumbled back, nearly slipping into the water. The voice wasn't human, not in the way words should be. It was something older, something that didn't care for flesh or bone, only for numbers. When he returned to the square, the others saw his face and knew. He didn't have to say it. That night, they stayed awake together, weapons ready, fire burning high. They didn't speak, not about what they'd heard, not about what they knew was coming. Midnight crept in like a thief, and with it came the silence, the same unnatural silence the villagers must have felt on that final night. And then the counting began, soft, steady, from the shadows, a voice that didn't belong to any of them. 997. They froze. 998. The flames guttered, though no wind blew. 999. The fire darkness swallowed them whole. And in that instant, Michael understood. The boy had never been spared. He had been left as part of the ritual. The last number wasn't finished. The valley still hungered. The darkness that fell over the square wasn't the kind that came with nightfall. It was thicker, alive, pressing against their skin and filling their lungs like smoke. Michael's first thought was that the fire had gone out. But no, this was more than that. The moon itself seemed swallowed, the stars erased, as though the world beyond the ruined village had ceased to exist. Only the counting voice remained, steady, deliberate, and it was inside their heads now. 999. Elena screamed, the sound ripping through the silence. She wasn't screaming in fear, but in defiance, her flashlight beam cutting across the blackness. "Show yourself," she shouted, but the beam revealed nothing except the hollow outlines of collapsed homes. Harrow swung his rifle in every direction, his training kicking in though his hands Father Cole clutched the crucifix hanging around his neck so tightly his knuckles whitened, whispering prayers so fast they sounded like gibberish. Michael couldn't move. The words 999 throbbed in his skull, echoing with each heartbeat. He realized then what the boy had meant when he said, it wanted one left. The slaughter hadn't been about revenge, or terror, or even power. It had been about filling a ledger, a sick ritual where lives were reduced to numbers. But the number was incomplete. It needed one more. The darkness pressed closer. He felt it brush against his face like icy fingers, tugging at his breath, trying to pull something out of him that wasn't physical. Then the laughter came again, that same childlike sound that had lured them into the ruins. But this time it wasn't distant. It was right there. Behind him. Michael spun, his flashlight beam jerking wildly. For a split second he saw it. A figure small, crouched low like a child playing hide and seek. But its eyes burned like coals and its smile was wide. Too wide. Splitting its face from ear to ear. It darted out of the light before he could scream. "Did you see it?" Michael gasped, his voice breaking. Harrow's rifle cracked. A burst of shots echoing through the night. He had seen it. The bullets tore through empty air. But the shadows rippled, bending unnaturally, as though the darkness itself had been struck. Then the voice returned. Calm. Unhurried. Counting forward this time. The fire roared back to life. Sudden and blinding. And in its light Michael saw Lina. On her knees. Her throat slit open. Blood spilling across the dirt. She hadn't even cried out. Her body twitched once. Then stilled. Michael stumbled back. Bile rising in his throat. No. No. It's not possible. She was right next to us. Harrow's face twisted with fury. We're not staying here. We move now. He grabbed Michael by the arm, dragging him toward the broken road that led out of the village. Father Cole followed, still praying, his voice louder now, steadier, as though the horror had stripped away his doubts. But the road didn't lead out. When they reached the edge of the ruins, where the cracked asphalt should have descended toward the river, they found only more ruin. The valley had folded in on itself, stretching the village into something endless. Every path circled back to the square. The fire still burned in the center, and Elena's body still lay crumpled in the dirt. We're trapped, Michael whispered. No, Harrow growled. There's always a way. He raised his rifle and fired into the air, the sound deafening, defiant. Come and get me, you bastard. The answer came immediately. 2. Harrow fired again and again into the shifting dark, his shouts mingling with the roar of the weapon. Then something pulled him backward. Michael saw it clearly this time. A black hand, long and skeletal, reaching out of the shadow, wrapping around Harrow's ankle. He fired downward, but the bullets vanished into the void. The hand yanked, dragging him across the dirt. Help me, Harrow shouted, clawing at the ground. Michael lunged, grabbing his arm. For one brief, desperate moment, he thought he could hold him. But then the shadow's strength surged, pulling harder. Harrow's grip slipped. His scream was cut short, as the darkness swallowed him whole. 3. Michael staggered back, his body shaking uncontrollably. He turned to Father Cole, who was still praying louder now, his crucifix held high. His voice thundered against the dark. Deliver us from evil. The shadows recoiled, twisting like smoke, but they did not break. The laughter rose again, mocking, echoing, a chorus of children's voices overlapping. Father Cole dropped to his knees, pressing the crucifix into the dirt, his entire body trembling with the force of his words. Michael wanted to believe it was working. For a moment, the shadows thinned, and he thought he saw stars again above them. But then the voice came back, colder than before. The crucifix shattered in Father Cole's hands. He gasped, staring at the broken metal. And in that instant, the darkness surged. Black tendrils wrapped around him, pulling him upward, lifting him off the ground like a puppet on strings. His prayers turned to screams, as his body twisted unnaturally, bones snapping one by one. Blood dripped down onto Michael's face, hot and metallic. Then, with a final sickening crack, Father Cole's body split apart, the pieces vanishing into the dark. Michael collapsed sobbing. He was the only one left. Out of all of them, only he remained. The fire flickered low, casting long trembling shadows. He clutched his notebook to his chest, the pages soaked with sweat and blood. He realized now what the boy had meant, why he had been spared. It wasn't mercy. It was torment. To be the last was to carry the weight of the 1,000. But the count was unfinished. The voice whispered again, almost tender. 999. Michael shook his head violently. No, you can't have me. I won't be your thousandth. The shadows stirred. The childlike figure stepped back into the firelight. Its smile was even wider now, its eyes glowing with a hunger that had no end. It crouched low, tilting its head at him, waiting. Michael's mind raced. If it needed one more, if it needed him to complete the 1,000, then maybe, just maybe, he could break the ritual by refusing. He staggered to his feet, clutching his notebook like a weapon. I won't let you finish. He spat. His voice cracked, but it was loud enough to echo through the ruins. The figure tilted its head further, as if curious. Then it took a step forward. Michael, he tore through the ruins, his lungs burning, his legs screaming with pain. The shadows pursued, slithering along the ground, climbing the broken walls. The laughter followed him, bouncing off the stones. He didn't know where he was going, only that he had to keep moving. If he stopped, it would end. He found himself at the river's edge. The water churned violently, black as oil, reflecting no light. He remembered the whisper he had heard there. One more. His stomach turned. The river wasn't an escape. It was part of. The figure appeared across the water, standing on the opposite bank. Its reflection rippled, broken, as though the river rejected even its image. It raised one finger slowly, deliberately, pointing at him. Michael screamed into the night, his voice raw. You'll never have me. Never. And with that he hurled himself into the river. The water swallowed him, icy and suffocating. He thrashed, kicking, clawing his way upward, but the current was too strong. It pulled him down deeper and deeper, until the world above was gone. His lungs burned, his vision blurred, and still the voice followed him. 10. The ritual wasn't complete until every last soul was claimed. The boy hadn't been spared. He had simply been waiting, carrying the curse forward, until the number was filled. Now it was, and somewhere, far below the surface of the Black River, Michael's notebook drifted free, its pages opening to the last words he had written. It wanted one left, until it did.
The air in the valley had changed. It no longer felt like ordinary silence, the kind born of isolation or distance. This silence was heavy, suffocating, a living thing pressing down on every breath. Michael sat with his back against the burned stone of the square, his notebook on the ground beside him, his body trembling with exhaustion. The fire they had relied on was long gone, and without its glow, the ruins seemed alive, walls shifting, shadows twisting, the very earth groaning, as if something vast stirred beneath it. He could still hear the final count echoing in his skull. 999. The voice hadn't spoken 1,000 yet. That meant one of them was marked, one of them chosen. Alina was pacing, her flashlight beams slicing erratically through the dark, her hair wild, her eyes bloodshot. "We need to get out," she said again, for what felt like the 100th time. "We need to leave this valley. Put miles between us, and whatever this is." "Go where?" Harrow barked, clutching his rifle. His voice was ragged, but his stance was steady, a soldier's training keeping him upright even as terror gnawed at his edges. "The second we step out of these ruins, it follows. You saw what it did last night. It's bound to the number, not the ground. If we run, it'll just finish its count elsewhere." Father Cole knelt nearby, hands clasped, lips moving silently in prayer. His skin looked waxen in the flashlight glow, and Michael wasn't sure if he prayed out of faith or sheer desperation. None of them trusted words anymore. Words had power in this valley, numbers especially. Michael spoke quietly, surprising even himself. "It wants one more. That's all, one more. And it ends." Alina turned on him, furious. "Ends? You think this ends? Look at history. These massacres have been happening for decades, maybe longer. It never ends. It just resets. The 1,000 becomes the first, and it begins again."
Her voice cracked, her anger faltering into despair. Don't you see? We're not here to survive. We're here to feed it. The thought lodged deep in Michael's chest, like a blade. She was right. The boy hadn't been spared. He had been the opening act, and now, as survivors, they weren't witnesses. They were vessels, bait, or worse. A sound cut through the night. Slow footsteps, deliberate, crunching over ash and gravel. All of them froze. Harrow raised his rifle, sweeping the beam of his flashlight across the ruins. Nothing, but the steps kept coming. Show yourself, Harrow shouted, though his voice cracked. The steps stopped. Silence pressed back in, denser than before. Then, out of the darkness, a figure emerged. It was the boy, the same boy who had been spared. His small body looked fragile, but his face was wrong, too still, too knowing. His eyes glowed faintly, reflecting the flashlight, like an animal's. He stood just beyond the reach of the circle of light, and when he spoke, his voice was not his own. One more. Alina stumbled back, her flashlight shaking in her grip. No, you're not real. You can't be real. The boy smiled faintly, not kindly, not innocently. His teeth were too sharp in the glow. One more, he repeated, tilting his head. Then peace. Harrow fired. The shot cracked through the valley, echoing off the ruined walls. The figure didn't flinch, didn't fall, didn't bleed. The boy only smiled wider, and the air grew colder. Michael grabbed Harrow's arm. Stop. It's not flesh. You can't kill it like that. The boy's form flickered, like smoke caught in wind, and then he was gone. The sound of laughter rose in his place, childlike and hollow, surrounding them from every direction. Father Cole stood suddenly, his voice breaking as he shouted into the dark, "In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy." His words choked off, as an invisible force struck him. He flew backward into the broken wall of a house, his body folding unnaturally, bones snapping like twigs. His prayer ended in a wet gasp. Blood seeped into the dirt beneath him. The laughter stopped. 999. The voice whispered. Michael's stomach turned. The priest's death hadn't added to the count. He had already been part of it. That meant the last number hadn't been claimed yet. Alina clutched Michael's arm, her nails digging into his skin. "It wants us to turn on each other. Don't you see? That's the ritual. It makes us desperate. Makes us finish its work." Harrow shook his head violently. No way. I won't be part of its damn tally." He pointed his gun outward, toward the ruins, toward the unseen thing. "Come for me yourself, you bastard." The valley answered. A scream tore through the night. Not human, not animal, but something vast and ancient. The ground trembled. The air stank of iron and rock. From the shadows between the ruins, shapes began to emerge. Figures tall and thin, their limbs impossibly long, their faces blank, except for mouths stretched wide in silent hunger. They moved like smoke, like shadows given weight, and they surrounded the three of them. Michael felt his sanity slipping. The notebook lay forgotten at his feet. Numbers swirled in his mind, filling every corner. 999. One more. Always one more. The creatures did not touch them. They stood in a perfect circle, enclosing them in darkness. "Wait." Alina's voice was a whisper. "It wants us to choose." The boy appeared again, standing within the circle now, closer than before. His face was calm, almost gentle. "One more," he said, tilting his head. "Only one. Then it's over. Then you can go." Harrow raised his rifle, hands trembling, pointing it at Alina, then at Michael, then at himself. Sweat dripped from his brow. "I won't do it. I won't give it what it wants." The boy's eyes glowed brighter. Harrow screamed and fired blindly, the bullets ripping into the night. The creatures didn't move, didn't fall. But Harrow did. His chest burst open as though torn by invisible claws, and he collapsed in a heap, his rifle clattering beside him. The boy smiled. 1,000. The valley roared. The creatures dissolved into smoke, vanishing into the ruins. The trembling earth stilled. The heavy silence lifted, leaving only the ordinary quiet of night. The boy blinked, his eyes dimming, his body sagging. For a moment, he looked like a child again. Lost, broken, he whispered, "Thank you," before crumpling to the ground and dissolving into ash. Michael and Alina stood frozen, unable to breathe, unable to believe what they had seen. The count was finished. The ritual was complete. Alina dropped to her knees, sobbing into her hands. Michael staggered forward, his body numb, and picked up his notebook. On the last page, in handwriting that wasn't his own, words had appeared. "It begins again." He stared at the page, the truth crashing over him. Alina's sobs quieted, and when he looked at her, her eyes were no longer her own. They glowed faintly, just as the boys had. "Michael," she whispered, her voice layered with something deeper. "We're not the end, we're the sea." Michael stumbled back, the notebook slipping from his fingers. The valley was quiet, but inside him, the number echoed. 1,000, 1,000. But already, in the dark corners of his mind, he could hear the next number forming. 1. The cycle had started again, and this time he realized with dawning horror, it wasn't bound to the valley anymore. It was inside them. The valley was only the beginning. The fire had long since gone out, and only silence remained in the valley. Where once there had been laughter, screams and whispers in the dark, now there was nothing but the hollow breath of the wind through broken beams and ruined stone. The river still flowed, carrying with it the secrets of the blood that had been spilled, but no voices rose from it anymore. The number was complete, 1,000, and with that completion came an emptiness, as though the land itself had exhaled after centuries of waiting. The boy who had been spared was never truly spared. He was only a placeholder, a reminder that the ritual was unfinished. Now the ritual was done. The mark of the valley had closed, and the hunger that had stretched across generations had finally fed to its limit. Michael's notebook was found by search parties weeks later, lying in the dirt at the edge of the square. Its pages were filled with half-scribbled notes, desperate sketches of symbols, fragments of conversations, and one final line repeated again and again in shaky handwriting. "Numbers are never satisfied. They only wait." No bodies were ever recovered. The village stood empty, frozen in its ruin, a scar on the land. The travelers, who passed too close, swore they could still hear counting in the distance, soft and patient, like something that had begun again. Because perhaps it wasn't about this valley at all. Perhaps the ritual was bigger, stretching far beyond one forgotten place. 1,000 was just a milestone, not an end. Somewhere else, sometime soon, the next count would begin, and this time, it wouldn't stop at 1,000.